Chapter 1. The Rotting Throne. 10 years ago, the morning sun had turned Clara's hair to liquid gold as she stood in the courtyard of Silver Moon Keep, surrounded by the entire pack. Griffin could still smell her, wildflowers and rain, a scent that made his wolf howl in recognition. Mate, mate, mate. You're human, Elder Marcus had whispered in his ear that morning. She'll weaken the bloodline, weaken the pack. Griffin had believed them. He stepped forward, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Clara Thorne, I, Griffin Blackwood, Alpha of the Silver Moon Pack. Her eyes, those green eyes that had looked at him like he hung the moon, began to fill with understanding, with horror. Reject you as my mate. The bond snapped. Griffin felt it tear through his chest like a blade, but he stood tall, strong. He had saved his pack. Clara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him with those breaking eyes and whispered, "You'll regret this." Then she turned and walked away, and Griffin's wolf howled in anguish, clawing at his ribs, begging him to stop her. He didn't. The elders had smiled, the pack had cheered, and Griffin Blackwood began to die. Present day. "Alpha, the western outpost has fallen!" The shout echoed through the corridors of Silver Moon Keep, but Griffin barely heard it over the sound of his own body destroying itself. He gripped the edges of the wash basin, staring at his reflection in the polished steel shield. At 30, he should have been a god of war. Instead, the face staring back looked 60, skin grey and translucent, stretched tight over protruding bones. His once electric blue eyes had sunk into bruised sockets. A spasm seized his chest. Griffin doubled over and coughed, a wet, violent sound that left flecks of black blood on his palm. The rot, the severed bond. This was the price of rejecting your fated mate. The goddess didn't forgive. She made you an example. "Enter," he rasped as someone pounded on the solar door. Roderick burst in, his massive beater, looking nearly as broken as Griffin felt. His once gleaming armor was rusted, held together with leather scraps and hope. "The Western Ridge outpost is gone," Roderick said, his voice hollow. "Not captured. Gone. Burned to ash. The Shadow Pack left no survivors." Griffin's blood turned to ice. The families? Dead. All of them. Roderick's jaw clenched. They left their heads on pikes facing the keep. "It's a message, Griffin. They're coming to erase us." "How long do we have?" 2 days. 3 if the storm holds. Roderick traced a finger across the map on Griffin's table. "They have 300 warriors, blood-mad berserkers. We have 50 soldiers so starved they can barely shift without dying from the strain." Griffin stared at the map, at the territory that had once been the jewel of the northern kingdoms. Rich forests, silver mines, fertile valleys. Now, ash and ice. The land died when its alpha died. That was the curse. "Evacuate the keep," Griffin ordered. "Send the mothers and children to the eastern caves." "To starve in the dark instead of dying in battle," Roderick snapped, his composure cracking. "There's no food, Griffin. We've eaten the rats. We've boiled leather for broth. If you send them to those caves, you're just choosing how they die." "Then what would you have me do?" Griffin snarled, but the sound was weak, pathetic. Not the roar of an alpha, the whimper of a dying dog. Silence crashed between them. "There's one option," Roderick finally said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. The North. Griffin's head snapped up. The frost waste is a graveyard. Not anymore. Roderick leaned forward, intensity blazing in his eyes. Refugees coming down from the mountains are telling stories about a fortress built into the ice peaks where nothing should survive, about a warlord who's built an army from rogues, exiles and the broken. A mercenary, Griffin dismissed. We have no gold. She doesn't want gold, Roderick interrupted. They call her the Wolf Queen. They say she's building an empire, and she doesn't collect coin. She collects loyalty, fealty. She takes in the unwanted and turns them into legends. Griffin laughed bitterly. And why would a Queen of the North save a pack of starving corpses? Because we control the southern pass, Roderick pressed. Silvermoon Keep is the gateway to the valleys. If she wants to expand her territory, she needs our fortress. It's a trade. Our stone walls for her army. Griffin looked at the map again. The North. The blank white space at the top of the parchment marked only with a single word. Frost waste. It was suicide. A week's journey through the worst terrain on the continent, in the dead of winter, for a man who could barely stand. But then he thought of the nursery, of the children who'd never seen spring, never chased rabbits through tall grass, never felt the sun on their faces. They were innocent of his sins. The journey will kill you before we reach the tree line, Roderick said quietly. Griffin walked to the chest at the foot of his bed and threw it open. The scent of cedar and lavender hit him. His dead wife's perfume. The woman he'd married for duty, who'd died giving him a stillborn son and even deeper loneliness. He reached past her silks to the bottom and pulled out the Alpha's cloak, magnificent grey wolf pelts lined with black velvet. He swung it over his shoulders, and for just a moment, he looked like a king again. Gather the 10 strongest warriors we have left, Griffin commanded, his voice finding a ghost of its old steel. We leave within the hour. Griffin, if I die on the road, you take the Alpha's seal and offer it to her yourself, Griffin continued. You beg this Wolf Queen to save the pack in exchange for my territory. I don't need to be alive to sign the treaty. I just need the pack to survive. Roderick stared at him for a long moment, then struck his fist to his chest. As you command, Alpha. When the door closed, Griffin walked to the narrow window and pushed it open. The wind slammed into him, carrying snow and ice that stung like tiny blades. He looked north, toward the bruised purple sky and the frozen hell beyond. Somewhere in that wasteland was a woman who'd built power from nothing. A woman who could save his pack. Griffin's fingers brushed the hollow of his throat, the smooth, unmarked skin where a mate's mark should have been, where Clara's mark should have been. That mark would have given him the strength to run for days, would have made him whole. I'm coming, he whispered to the howling wind, thinking of green eyes and gold-lit hair. If I had known what it would cost, I would have burned the world for you, Clara. I would have torn down the sky. A tear froze on his cheek, but I didn't. I let the world freeze instead. He turned from the window, extinguishing the dying candle on his table. And now, I walk into the ice to pay for it. Griffin Blackwood, the dying Alpha of the Silver Moon, stepped out of his solar and into the blizzard. Behind him, the rotting throne sat empty in the darkness. Chapter 2. The Fortress of Ice. 7 days through a white hell. Griffin had stopped counting the bodies on day 3, guards who'd simply sat down in the snow and never stood up again. By day 5, he wasn't walking anymore. He was dragging himself forward on pure spite, on the desperate animal instinct of a dying wolf seeking one last den. His lungs felt like shattered glass with every breath. Black blood froze on his lips before he could wipe it away. Roderick had tried to carry him twice. Griffin had snarled him off both times. "I will not arrive as a corpse." Then, through the blinding curtain of snow, a shape emerged. Griffin stopped, his boots sinking into powder, his vision swimming. "By the goddess," Roderick whispered beside him, his voice cracking. "That's no refugee camp." What rose from the ice was a fortress carved from the mountain itself, a weapon of black obsidian that swallowed the pale Arctic light. Walls 50 feet high curved around the peak, seamless as polished glass. Massive iron braziers burned along the ramparts with blue fire, alchemical flames that hissed against the falling snow, casting bruised shadows across the ice. This wasn't a camp of desperate rogues. This was an empire. The massive iron gates groaned open before they even called out. Heat blasted from within, the smell of sulfur and molten steel hitting Griffin's frozen face like a physical slap. A phalanx of warriors blocked the entrance, not the mismatched rags of exiles. These wore uniform armor. Dark boiled leather, blackened chainmail, silver fur trim from frost bears. They held halberds with the discipline of the king's own guard. "State your business, strays," the lead warrior barked. He was massive, a scar splitting his nose, his wolf scent heavy with dominance. He looked at Griffin with sneering disgust. Griffin threw back his hood, revealing his gaunt, grey face. "I am Griffin Blackwood, Alpha of the Silver Moon Pack. I demand audience with your queen." The warrior laughed, harsh and mocking. "An alpha?" He stepped closer, sniffing theatrically. "You smell like rot and death, old man. I smell no alpha here." Roderick's hand went to his sword. Griffin caught his wrist. "Peace." "If you want to see the Lady of Frost," the guard said, his grin vanishing, "you enter as petitioners, not warriors. Drop your steel." "We are envoys," Roderick protested. "To disarm an alpha is an act of—" "Look around you, skeleton." The guard gestured at the fortress walls. "You're in no position to make threats. Disarm or freeze at the gate." Griffin stared at the ancestral sword at his hip, the blade that hadn't left his side in 10 years. Slowly, with shaking fingers, he unbuckled the belt. The scabbard clattered onto frozen stone. One by one, his starving guards followed suit, piling their rusted weapons in a heap of shame. "Smart," the guard grunted. "Now move, and keep your eyes down. The wolves here don't appreciate strangers staring." They were herded through the gates like cattle. The wind died instantly, blocked by the sheer walls. The air was warm, heated by vents releasing steam from the volcanic heart of the mountain. But it was what Griffin saw that truly broke him. Paved streets, cleared of snow. Stone houses with smoke curling from chimneys. A smithy where 3 massive shifters hammered glowing steel. A marketplace, stalls piled with dried meats, furs, vegetables. The smell of roasting venison hit him like a fist. Griffin's stomach cramped violently. His wolves were whimpering, eyes wide. These people, these rogues, were fat. their coats glossy, thriving in a frozen wasteland while Griffin's pack ate boiled leather in a castle surrounded by forests. The humiliation burned hotter than the fever in his blood. I failed them. I failed so completely. The central keep was a spire of black stone piercing the clouds. The great doors, carved from the bones of some leviathan, were pushed open. A roar of noise washed over them, laughter, tankards clattering, the rumble of conversation. Then silence. As Griffin stepped into the great hall, the noise died like someone had cut its throat. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Griffin walked the center aisle, boots echoing on obsidian floor. He kept his head high, but his eyes scanned the crowd. Recognition jolted through him. Cold sweat prickled his neck. I know these faces. There, Cale, a warrior Griffin had exiled 5 years ago for challenging his authority. Cale grinned, running a thumb across his throat. Further down, Elara, a healer he'd banished for unsanctioned herbalism. She watched him with cold, hard pity. Murderers, thieves, traitors. The unwanted refuse of Silver Moon and a dozen other packs. They were all here, all staring at him with the hunger of predators watching a wounded stag limp into their den. They could smell his sickness, his decay. The air was thick with aggression, a suffocating pressure that made Roderick tremble beside him. At the far end of the hall, a dais rose above the floor. On it sat a throne carved from a single block of jagged obsidian, draped in snow leopard furs. And on the throne sat a figure. Griffin stopped 10 paces from the steps, his heart hammered against his ribs. The figure was small, dwarfed by the massive throne, but the presence radiating from her was titanic. It rolled off the dais in waves, tasting of ozone and violence. An Alpha Prime aura. The kind of power that could force a lesser wolf to their belly with a thought. She wore fitted black leather that gleamed like oil, silver plates at the shoulders. A midnight blue cloak pooled around her boots. Her face was hidden in shadow, but her hands, resting on the obsidian arms, were pale and steady. "Kneel!" a voice boomed from the shadows. Griffin remained standing. His legs shook, his lungs burned. But he would not kneel. Not yet. The figure on the throne stood. The movement was fluid, lethal, like a viper uncoiling. She descended the stairs. 1 step, 2. Then the scent hit him. It crashed into Griffin like a tidal wave, drowning out smoke and meat and unwashed bodies. Rain. Cold, clean rain on dry earth. Pine needles crushed underfoot. Lightning before a storm. His wolf, dormant and dying for a decade, howled in the back of his mind, half agony, half ecstasy. Griffin gasped, the sound loud in the silent hall. No, it can't be. The woman stepped into the torchlight. Griffin's world narrowed to a single point. The curve of her jaw, the delicate arch of her brow, the mouth he'd kissed 1,000 times in dreams. Clara. But not Clara. The Clara he'd known had soft brown eyes filled with shy adoration. The woman before him had eyes of glowing, molten amber. Wolf eyes with vertical pupils that locked onto his with terrifying coldness. She'd survived the transition. The human girl he'd cast out to die had not only survived, she'd conquered the beast. She'd become something else entirely. She stopped, inches from him. The heat of her body was a furnace against his chill. The bond, The tether he'd severed snapped back into place. But it was wrong. It didn't feel like reunion. It felt like a chain wrapping around his throat. The sheer power of her presence buckled his knees. Griffin didn't decide to fall. His body simply surrendered. He collapsed to the hard stone, hands bracing against the floor, head bowed, gasping as the scent of his rejected mate overwhelmed him. He stared at her boots, black leather, steel-tipped. He couldn't look up. The shame was too heavy. "Clara," he wheezed, a broken prayer. "That name is dead." Her voice was low, melodic, utterly devoid of warmth. The sound of wind over a grave. She reached out, a gloved hand tilting his chin up, forcing him to meet her burning gaze. No forgiveness in those amber depths, only sharp, predatory calculation. She looked at his grey hair, his hollow cheeks, the black blood staining his lips. She took in the ruin of the man who'd once been her world. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. "You're late, Griffin." The hall remained deathly silent. Every eye watched the dying Alpha kneel before the queen he had created. 10 years later. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Who She Was. The silence after her words wasn't empty, it was suffocating. A physical weight pressing against the obsidian walls. Rain, not Clara, never Clara again, watched the man kneeling before her. For 10 years she'd rehearsed this moment. In the fever dreams of her transition, when her bones snapped and reshaped under the agony of the curse, she'd visualized him begging, bleeding, broken. But the reality was so much more visceral than her imagination had allowed. She kept her face impassive, a mask of cold porcelain. But beneath the armor, a firestorm raged. His scent, once safety and home, was now rancid with sickness, with rot. But beneath the decay, the old bond pulled at her soul, a hooked chain trying to drag her back to the girl she used to be. Clara. She hated that girl, hated the weak human child who'd stood at the Silver Moon border, shivering in a thin dress, while Griffin sat on his high horse and read the decree of banishment. She remembered the cold snow seeping into her boots, the guards dragging her, her heels digging into mud, screaming for him to look at her. He hadn't looked. He'd turned his horse and ridden back to his warm castle. He'd left her to the mercy of the wild. And the wild had no mercy. The memory. Rain's fingers tightened on the dagger at her hip. He didn't know. He didn't know about the nights huddled in a hollow log, starving. He didn't know about the rogue pack that found her, about the rogue Alpha, a beast of scar and sinew, who'd bidden her not to turn her, but to kill her slowly, to watch the magic tear her frail human body apart for sport. But she hadn't died. She'd screamed until her throat bled, convulsed until her muscles tore. But she'd refused to let Griffin be the last thing she remembered. When she woke 3 days later, her eyes burning gold, she'd torn out the throat of the Alpha who'd turned her. Clara. Griffin's broken voice shattered her reverie. He reached a trembling hand toward the hem of her cloak, as if touching the fabric could bridge the abyss between them. "You're alive." Rain stepped back sharply. She would not let him touch her. The bond flared, demanding contact, begging her to soothe her suffering mate. She crushed the instinct under her boot. do not speak that name." Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Clara died in the snow 10 years ago, Griffin. She froze to death while you sat by your fire." Griffin flinched as if she'd struck him. He looked up, searching her eyes, desperate to find the soft, brown-eyed girl who used to braid flowers into his mane. He found only the predator. I didn't know," he wheezed, black blood speckling his lips. "I thought you'd go to the human villages. I thought you'd be safe." "Safe?" Rain laughed, dark and jagged, scraping against stone. "You threw a lamb into a den of wolves and told yourself you were setting it free. Don't lie to yourself, Alpha. You didn't care if I was safe. You only cared that I was gone." She circled him slowly, boots clicking on obsidian. Her pack watched in silence, hundreds of hardened killers who'd tear him apart at a single nod. They felt her rage bleeding into the pack link like crimson tide. "I did what I had to do," Griffin whispered, head bowed. "To save the lineage, to protect the pack. And look at you now." She gestured at his emaciated form. "Look at your lineage, ending in rot and ruin." Griffin closed his eyes. A tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. "I was wrong. I was a boy and I was wrong. I've paid for it every day for 10 years. You haven't even begun to pay." Rain leaned down until her face was inches from his. She could smell the fear on him now, acrid and sharp. "Why are you here, Griffin? Did you come to die at my feet? To force me to watch the bond kill you?" Griffin looked up. For a moment, steel returned to his eyes, a faint glimmer, a dying ember of the king he used to be. "No. I came to beg." Rain straightened, crossing her arms. "Beg, then." "The Shadow Pack," Griffin said, words rushing out desperately. "They've crossed the river, burned the western outpost. They kill everyone, Rain. Everyone. They leave heads on pikes." He swallowed hard, fighting a cough. "My warriors are starving. They can't shift. We have no food, no allies. In 2 days, Silver Moon will be erased from history." His hand shook violently as he reached out. "I don't ask for myself. Let me die. I deserve the rot. But the families, the pups in the nursery, they're innocent. They didn't choose an alpha who was a fool." His voice cracked. "Please, you have an army. You have food. Save them." Rain stared at him. The pups. The innocents. The words twisted a knife in her gut. She remembered begging him, clutching his stirrup as he sat on his horse, sobbing. "Please, Griffin, I have nowhere to go. I'll die." He'd looked down at her with eyes of ice and said, "That's not my concern." Now he dared use innocence as a weapon against her. Cold fury settled over her, chilling the heat of the bond. She looked at Roderick. The beater looked ready to faint from hunger. The guards shivered despite the hall's warmth. Pathetic. Weak. "You appeal to my mercy?" Rain asked softly, her voice carrying to the back of the hall. "You ask me to spill the blood of my people, my strong, loyal people, to save the pack that cast me out like garbage?" "Yes," Griffin whispered. "No." The word hung in the air, absolute and final. Griffin's shoulders slumped. The hope that had sustained him through the blizzard evaporated. "You speak of innocence," Rain continued, her voice rising with power. "But where was Silver Moon's mercy when I was bleeding in the snow? Where were these innocent families When their alpha dragged his mate to the border? Did they speak up for me? Offer me a coat? A crust of bread? She looked around the hall, meeting her warrior's eyes. No, they cheered. They cheered for their strong alpha, purging the weakness from his bloodline. She looked back at Griffin. You want me to save them? Give me one reason why I shouldn't let the Shadow Pack finish what you started. Because you're not me, Griffin said, barely audible. Because you're better than I was. The words struck like a physical blow. Rain froze. He was right, and she hated him for it. If she let them die, she proved his old counsel right, that she was nothing but a vengeful creature. But if she saved them, she rewarded the man who destroyed her. The bond screamed at her, confusing her thoughts, making her hands shake with the urge to grab him, to heal him, to claim him. She needed him out of her sight. Guards! Two massive lichens, executioners with eyes devoid of pity, stepped forward. Take him, Rain ordered. Throw him in the dungeon, the deepest cell. No heat, no furs. Roderick surged forward. You can't. He's dying. The cold will kill him tonight. Then he'd better pray to the goddess he rejected. Rain's voice was ice. She turned her burning gaze back to Griffin. I'll decide if your pack is worth saving after I've watched you bleed a little. I want you to sit in the dark, Griffin. I want you to feel the cold. I want you to know exactly how I felt for 10 years. The guards seized Griffin by the arms. He didn't struggle, didn't have the strength. They hauled him up, his boots dragging on obsidian. As they pulled him away, Griffin turned his head. His eyes locked onto hers one last time. No anger in them, no entitlement. Only profound, shattering acceptance. I deserve this, he whispered. The words drifted across the distance, soft as falling snow. Rain stood frozen on the throne steps. She watched them drag him into the shadows, watched the heavy iron door slam shut, cutting off the sight of his broken body. She should have felt triumph. This was the moment she'd lived for. The great Alpha brought low. The king, a beggar in her court. But as the echo of the door faded, she didn't feel triumph. She felt a sharp, jagged crack form in the armor around her heart. Her inner wolf whined, scratching at the walls of her mind, mourning the separation from its mate. Rain gripped her dagger until the leather creaked. She stared at the empty space where he'd knelt, at the drops of black blood he'd left on her pristine floor. Clean that up, she ordered a servant, voice trembling with suppressed rage. She turned and marched back to her throne, sitting hard. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the door. But she could still feel him. Down in the dark, cold, dying. And God help her, she could feel his pain as if it were her own. The hall remained silent. Her pack waited. Finally, Roderick's voice broke the quiet, hoarse, desperate. Please, my queen. He came here to die for his people. Doesn't that count for something? Rain's amber eyes slid to him. It counts for nothing. He should have died for me 10 years ago. She stood, her cloak billowing. You Silver Moon wolves will be fed and given quarters. But your alpha stays in the dark until I decide what his life is worth. She descended the throne steps, walking toward the side corridor, toward her private chambers. And someone send word to my scouts, she called over her shoulder. I want everything we know about the Shadow Pack. Numbers, movements, weaknesses. Roderick's eyes widened. "You're considering helping us?" Rain paused at the doorway, not turning around. "I'm considering whether letting you all die would keep me awake at night." She disappeared into the shadows. Chapter 4. The Cell and the Offer. The darkness in the cell wasn't empty. It was alive, heavy, pressing against Griffin's skin like a wet wool blanket. The cold was absolute. It seeped up through damp straw, biting into his bones, turning the fluid in his lungs to sludge. He lay curled on his side, shivering violently, every breath a ragged battle. The irony was bitter poison. 10 years ago, he'd cast her into winter to die. Now he lay in the dark, freezing, while she sat on a throne of warm obsidian above him. But the cold wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the fire. Being this close to Rain had woken the dormant bond, but it hadn't healed him. Her rejection acted as accelerant. The tether between them was a live wire, thrashing and burning, demanding connection she refused to grant. He was burning up and freezing to death simultaneously, suspended in purgatory of his own making. Time lost meaning. Hours? Days? He drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by fever dreams of a girl with wildflowers in her hair, who turned into a wolf with eyes of burning coal. The screech of rusted hinges shattered the silence. Griffin flinched, tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave way. He collapsed back into the straw, panting. A silhouette stood in the doorway, framed by torchlight. Small, but casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the cell whole. She stepped inside. The door clicked shut, sealing them in together. Rain and ozone filled the stagnant air, overpowering mold and sickness, intoxicating. Griffin's wolf clawed at the back of his mind, desperate to crawl toward her. "Drink." The command was sharp, devoid of pity. Rain stood over him, holding a leather waterskin. She'd shed her heavy cloak, revealing fitted black leather that hugged her form like second skin. In the dim light, her amber eyes glowed with predatory luminescence. Griffin stared at the waterskin, throat parched, tongue like sandpaper. "Why?" "Because I need you lucid," she said coldly. "A corpse can't answer questions." She didn't wait for him to take it. She crouched down, fluid, lethal grace, and grabbed his jaw with one hand. Her fingers were strong, unyielding. She tilted his head back. The contact sent a shockwave through him, pure electricity. His back arched off the straw. For 1 second, the pain in his chest vanished, replaced by overwhelming, addictive rush. She poured water into his mouth. He choked, coughing but swallowed greedily. Ice cold, shocking his system. When she pulled away, the loss of contact was a physical blow. He slumped back, gasping. "You look pathetic," she stated, wiping her hand on her thigh as if she'd touched something filthy. "I am," Griffin whispered. He looked up at her, trying to find a trace of the woman he'd known. "I'm everything you say I am." "Don't," she snapped, voice vibrating with sudden anger. She paced the small cell. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The confined space crackled with energy. Sexual. Violent. War. "Don't try to play the martyr, Griffin. It doesn't suit you. You were the golden prince, the alpha of alphas." "I was a boy," Griffin said, the words tearing from his throat. He forced himself to sit up, leaning against the damp wall. "A boy, listening to old men who feared change. I was stupid, Clara. Arrogant. and I've paid for it every single day for 10 years. I've watched my pack rot, my wife die, my own face turn into a stranger's. Rain stopped pacing. She loomed over him, expression unreadable. You think suffering absolves you? No, Griffin said softly. Nothing absolves me. But I wanted you to know. It wasn't hate. When I sent you away, it wasn't hate. It was fear. Rain laughed, sharp as a whip crack. She leaned down, bracing her hands on the wall on either side of his head, trapping him, her face inches from his. He could feel the heat radiating from her, smell the intoxicating musk of her skin. The proximity was dizzying. He wanted to reach out, bury his face in her neck, beg her to make the pain stop. Fear, she murmured, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You were afraid of a human girl who loved you, and because of that fear, you created a monster. She pulled back slightly, eyes searching his. Regret doesn't rebuild empires, Griffin. Tears don't feed starving pups. You came here to make a deal. So let's make a deal. Griffin's heart hammered. You'll help us. I'll march my legions south at first light, Rain said, tone shifting to General's command. We'll break the Shadow Pack, slaughter them to the last wolf, open our granaries and feed your people. Rebuild your walls. Griffin let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, a sob of relief catching in his throat. Thank you. Goddess, thank you. I'll give you anything. The silver mines, trade routes, half the territory, anything. I don't want half, Rain cut him off, eyes narrowing. I want it all. Griffin froze. All? The Silver Moon Pack ceases to exist, she declared. Your lands, resources, people, they become mine. They'll swear fealty to the Frost Legion. There will be no alliance, only absorption. You'll sign the deed of abdication tonight. Griffin stared at her. To dissolve the pack? It was erasing 500 years of history, ending the Blackwood line forever. But the alternative was total annihilation. I accept, he whispered. If it saves them, I accept. I'm not finished. A cruel, sharp light entered her eyes. She reached out, traced the line of his jaw with a single fingernail, sharp enough to scratch skin. The touch was agonizingly slow. You rejected me because I wasn't an alpha, she said softly. You wanted strength, hierarchy. So we'll respect the hierarchy. She leaned in closer, lips brushing the shell of his ear. He shuddered, sensation sending fire racing down his spine. You won't die, Griffin. I won't allow it. I'll keep you alive. But you won't be an alpha. You won't be a lord. Her voice dropped to a whisper, silk-wrapped blade. You'll be mine. Yours? He breathed, confused. My servant, she whispered. My personal guard. You'll stand at the foot of my throne, pour my wine, watch me rule the empire you were too weak to build. You'll wear my collar and answer to my command. She pulled back to look him in the eye, gaze hard and triumphant. You rejected me as your equal. Now, you'll serve me as your queen. Do we have a deal, Alpha? Griffin looked at her, saw the vengeance in her eyes, the need to balance the scales. She wanted to own him as completely as he'd once discarded her. It was a fate worse than death for a man of his pride, to be a servant in the house of his mate, close to the fire, but never allowed to touch it. But he thought of the pups, Roderick, the empty nursery. Slowly, Griffin lowered his head, baring his neck in ultimate submission. "I am yours," he whispered. Rain smiled. It was terrifying. "Good." She stood, offering her hand, not in kindness, but in command. "Then get up, pet. We have a war to win." Griffin stared at her outstretched hand. 10 years ago, he'd refused to take it, had watched her stumble away into the snow alone. Now, broken and dying, he reached up and placed his trembling hand in hers. Her grip was iron. She hauled him to his feet with shocking strength. He swayed, legs barely holding him, but her hand steadied him. For just a moment, one heartbeat, her amber eyes softened. A flicker of something that might have been the girl she used to be. Then it was gone. "The collar will be silver," she said, voice cold again, "so everyone knows exactly who you belong to." She turned toward the door, still holding his hand, pulling him forward. "And Griffin?" She glanced back over her shoulder. "If you ever try to give me orders again, I'll let the Shadow Pack have what's left of your territory. Are we clear?" "Crystal," he rasped. "Good." She smiled again, predator and queen. "Welcome to the Frost Legion, pet." Chapter 5. The Collar. "Get up!" The command wasn't shouted, but it struck Griffin like a physical blow. He scrambled to his feet, damp straw clinging to his ruined clothes, body swaying. Light-headed, not just from fever, but from the magnitude of what he'd just done. He'd sold his soul, traded his crown for a collar. Rain didn't offer a hand. She turned on her heel, black leather armor creaking softly, and swept out without looking back. Griffin followed, stumbling into the corridor, eyes adjusting painfully to torchlight. He walked a step behind her, head lowered, falling into the rhythm of a subordinate before the ink was even dry. The guards watched him pass, expressions shifting from contempt to confusion as they saw the broken alpha trailing their queen like a beaten hound. The climb back to the Great Hall was a blur of grey stone and spiralling stairs. Every step was battle against his failing lungs. But the fear of falling, of showing weakness before her again, kept him moving. When the heavy doors groaned open, the noise of the gathered legion died instantly. Hundreds of heads turned. Roderick, pacing near the hearth, froze. His eyes widened as he saw Griffin. The beater took a step forward, hope flaring, then extinguishing the moment he saw Griffin's posture. Griffin didn't walk to the center as an equal. He stopped at the edge of the dais, eyes on the floor, while Rain ascended the obsidian steps. She didn't sit. She turned to face her army, silhouette framed by the banners of the Frost Legion, blue and silver wolves howling at a storm. "The War Council is convened!" Rain's voice rang out, clear and imperious. "The Silver Moon Pack is no more!" A gasp rippled through the hall. Roderick looked gutted. Griffin flinched, but remained silent. He'd made his choice. "Their lands, their mines, their lives are now property of the Frost Legion," Rain continued, gaze sweeping the crowd, daring challenge. "We march south at dawn to reclaim what is now ours. We will break the Shadow Pack, not as allies of Silver Moon, but as their conquerors." She looked down at Griffin, and their former alpha has abdicated his title. Roderick made a choked sound. Griffin, surely— Silence, Griffin rasped, not looking at his friend. It's done. Rain snapped her fingers. A servant emerged carrying a bundle of heavy fabric. She took it, a cloak of black velvet lined with midnight wolf pelt. Embroidered on the back in silver thread, the crest of the Frost Legion. Kneel, she said. The hall went silent. Griffin could hear the hiss of torches. He looked up at her. She stood above him, terrible and beautiful, amber fire in her eyes, demanding total submission. Griffin sank to his knees on hard stone. He bowed his head, exposing the nape of his neck, the most vulnerable part of a wolf, where a mate would bite to claim, or an enemy would bite to kill. Rain stepped down. She unfurled the cloak and draped it over his shoulders, heavy, pressing him down, but warm. She fastened the silver clasp at his throat, fingers brushing his skin. You belong to the Legion now, she whispered, low enough only he could hear. You belong to me. The moment the clasp clicked shut, the world shifted. For 10 years, the bond had been a gaping wound, bleeding his vitality into the void. But as he submitted, as he accepted her claim, the dynamic inverted. A sudden, violent rush of heat surged through the tether. Not his strength, hers. Rain was an alpha prime, overflowing with power. Now that he'd accepted his place as her subordinate, her guardian, the bond opened a channel. Her power flooded into him, cauterizing the rot in his lungs, knitting the frayed edges of his spirit. It was painful, a searing rush of adrenaline and magic that made him gasp. But it was life. Rain felt the connection snap into place, a heavy iron link forging between her soul and his. She felt his hollowness, his starvation, felt her own power rushing to fill it like water into a dry riverbed. It disgusted her, this parasitic need, but it also satisfied a dark, primal itch. He was no longer the king on the hill. He was a weapon she'd forged, feeding from her hand. She stepped back, watching colour return to his grey cheeks. The tremors in his hands ceased. He looked up, his eyes no longer dull. They burned with reflected light, blue fire fueled by her amber flame. Rise, sentinel, she commanded. Griffin stood. He moved differently now. The stoop gone, the hesitation gone. He stood at her right hand, a silent shadow in black, his existence tethered entirely to hers. Before the court could process the transformation, a low, mournful sound shattered the atmosphere. The deep vibration of a war horn tore through stone walls, coming from the ramparts. Alarm! A voice screamed from the entrance. The doors burst open. A scout skidded across the floor, blood streaming from his head. Breach! They breached the perimeter! Rain's hand flew to her sword hilt. Who? The Shadow Pack! The scout gasped, choking on blood. They tracked him. Tracked the Silver Moon scent through the storm. They're at the lower gates. The hall erupted into chaos. Warriors scrambled for weapons, overturning tables. But Rain was an island of ice in the firestorm. She looked at Griffin. They came for you, she said, voice deadly calm. They'll die for it, Griffin replied, not a rasp anymore. A growl, deep, vibrating with violence he hadn't felt in a decade. Rain drew 2 short swords from her back, steel singing as it cleared leather. She didn't look at her generals, didn't look at her army. She looked at the man standing in her shadow. "Then prove it," she snarled, eyes glowing with anticipation of slaughter. "Time to earn your keep, pet." Griffin didn't hesitate, didn't think about the pain or the 10 years he'd spent unable to access his wolf. He simply let the new power flowing from Rain tear through him. He threw his head back and screamed, a sound that twisted into a roar as his bones cracked and reshaped. The black cloak shredded, falling away as fur erupted from his skin. Muscles swelled, snapping with velocity. It was agony, a baptism of fire. He welcomed it. In the space of a heartbeat, the man was gone. Standing in his place was a wolf of monstrous proportions. Midnight black, a void in the room. His shoulders came up to Rain's chest, scarred, gaunt, but rippling with supernatural strength of the Queen's bond. The great wolf snarled, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. He snapped his jaws, saliva dripping from fangs the length of daggers. He looked at Rain, blue eyes burning with singular, terrifying purpose. "Command me." Rain looked at the beast she'd resurrected. A savage grin spread across her face, mirroring the ferocity of the monster at her side. She pointed her sword toward the open doors, toward the screams of the dying, the roar of invaders. "Kill them all," she whispered. The great wolf lunged forward, a black shadow of death and fury. Rain shifted in an instant, her own transformation fluid as water. A wolf of pure silver and white, smaller but radiating power like a star. Side by side, Queen and Sentinel, they burst through the doors. Behind them, the Frost Legion howled as one and charged. Epilogue. Battlefield. Dawn. The lower courtyard was a slaughterhouse. Shadowpack warriors, massive, feral berserkers, were being torn apart by coordinated strikes from the Frost Legion. But at the centre of the carnage, two wolves moved like dancers in a storm. The Silver Queen was precision, every strike calculated, every kill efficient. The Black Sentinel was pure violence, a battering ram of tooth and claw, protecting her flanks, clearing her path. They moved as one, connected, bonded. When the last Shadowpack warrior fell, silence crashed over the courtyard. Bodies everywhere, blood steaming in the cold air. Rain shifted back to human form, not even breathing hard. Her armor was splattered with blood, but she was untouched. She looked at the massive black wolf still standing guard over her. "Shift," she commanded softly. Griffin shifted, dropping to one knee before her, naked and covered in blood. But alive, truly alive, for the first time in 10 years. "You did well," Rain said, not quite looking at him. "I live to serve, my queen," Griffin replied, head bowed. Rain's jaw tightened. She turned away, looking out at her victorious army. "Get him clothes," she snapped at a servant, "and prepare the war council. We march south at dawn to finish this." As she walked away, Griffin remained on his knee, watching her go. Roderick approached cautiously, offering a cloak. "Griffin, what have you become?" Griffin took the cloak, wrapping it around himself. His eyes never left Rain's retreating form. "What I should have been from the beginning," he said softly. "Hers." The end.